This edition of MacVoices is supported by you, our viewers and listeners, through our new Patreon campaign. If you get value from MacVoices, please consider helping support the show by visiting patreon.com/MacVoices. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this is a different show. This honestly is just going to be a fun show for me because I am honored and privileged, and I mean that sincerely, to have both of these guests here to talk about something that is not necessarily Mac, not even necessarily computer, but something that I have I have an affinity for, and I think they do too. I know they do. First up, Mr. Ken Ray. Ken, welcome. It's good to see you.
Always a pleasure, Chuck. Thanks for having us on.
It's embarrassing that you haven't been back on since the last time you were on, but we get it done eventually. And for his first time on MacVoices, and I can't even figure out how that happened, that we haven't had him before, but Mr. John Champion. John, welcome.
Hey, pleasure to be here. And you said up top this is going to be fun, so we will hold you to it. I'm sure the audience will too.
So I have to deliver. Thanks. That's good.
Yeah. Here we go.
Well, ordinarily, I would introduce Ken as the perpetrator of macOS Ken, which he is. But
right.
The reason that I have these two gentlemen here this time is that they are the co-hosts of two different flavors of Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. And I love this show for lots of reasons that we will get into. But I wanted to delve into that. I wanted to delve into an experience that they gave to me that I really didn't expect. It was my first, my first impressive experience with virtual reality was the thing that struck me about it. But we'll get to that in a minute. I want to talk about the mission logs, both the live and the pre-recorded version. And find out a little bit about how this came to be. And because if you listen, folks, you know, and I need to shut up and let them talk. But the thing is, these aren't just two fanboys necessarily of Star Trek, talking about how wonderful it is. They really dig deep into these shows, and they've made me think on just about every occasion and see every episode of Star Trek in a way that I never really appreciated before. So where did Mission Log come from, guys?
Chronologically, John should tell the story first.
Okay.
Or his part of it, anyway.
I'll give you the super short version of it, which is that Rod Roddenberry, our friend, and happens to be the son of Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, have been working on a documentary about his father. And it's called Trek Nation. It's a great movie. It sort of explores who was the man who came up with this thing, Star Trek. But then the thing that I think has always been fascinating about Rod is that he's this guy who, as a kid grew up hearing people say, your father's show changed my life. And he wanted to understand that by understanding his father, but then understanding the show. So he had this idea of, well, what if we put together a podcast or something that was a format to explore every single episode of Star Trek from the beginning. And I had known Rod through, primarily through a podcast that I did. So he knew that was something that I did. We talked and talked and talked. And he said, and I know this other guy who I'm going to see very soon, who I'd like to talk to about doing this as well. So I had not met Ken. Ken had not met me. We didn't know about each other at all. This was all Rod's creation. And I kind of thought he was a little bit crazy because it was just sort of, talk over a drink saying, we should do a thing. We should do a thing about Star Trek. And what that thing was, a blog, a documentary, a podcast, didn't really know what it would be. And then very soon after Ken and I started, people started writing to us saying, you realize it'll take you 15 years to do this at your current pace.
I did not realize at all at the time. Didn't even occur to me. It's just like one of those things. But then again, macOS Ken was ever only going to be 6 months, I thought. And that was 13 years ago or 12 and a half years ago. So John and Rod are talking unbeknownst to me. I actually already knew Rod a bit because he was a macOS Ken listener from a few years back. He had established contact a couple of times, which was cool. And then he actually started going to Macworld before it ended. And so one year, I think you hung out with him. We all hung out with him a bit. It was the following year that he came back to Macworld that he said, so I had this idea for this thing. And we spent, gosh, I guess that first conversation was in either February or March, and we spent 4 months woodshedding. I'm a huge fan of format. Anybody who's listened to any show that I've been part of knows that. So we built a clock that was, okay, this part of the show will be this, and here's where trivia comes in, and then here's the section where we do the recap, and here's the sort of lighthearted bit, and then we built the show. It's interesting because if you go back and listen to the first 10 episodes, there have been tiny little tweaks, but really the format's been there since day one. And that was great. And then go ahead 5 years, and CBS is like, hey, we're going to do a new Star Trek series. We're going to do a thing called Discovery. And everybody's like, oh, great. We're all going to do podcasts about it. And so we decided that one way to differentiate a show would be to go live, so that instead of just the two of us doing sort of the talking track or after track or talking dead or walking track or whatever you want to call it, instead of just doing we watched it, here's what we think about it. We wanted to have a few guests on to talk about it, which is not a huge barrier breaker. But then we also wanted to be able to have people call in and talk about it as well. So people can call in, people can video in, and then for some reason we just kept going. Because Discovery ended quite a while ago, and yet we're all like, yeah, we can do another show a week. Why wouldn't we? And so the show morphs a bit. We don't talk about Discovery anymore, obviously, when it's not on. But we are reaching out and finding some interesting guests and talking about topics that we firmly believe that people will find interesting. They don't all generate calls, which is kind of funny. But you've done live shows before, haven't you, Chuck?
Oh yeah, I've done live shows.
Yeah. So you know how there's like this whole other thing that happens in the chat room that you might not even be aware of because you're busy doing a show. We're actually doing Mission Log Live. I feel like is actually 2 shows in one. There's the show that we're doing on mic and on camera. Then there's whatever is going on in the chat room, which I should go back and read sometime because they could be saying horrible things about me and or John. Probably John.
Yeah. No, it's really funny. It's really entertaining because you have regulars who show up and they have their own style. You sort of expect what they're going to say, but then they have their own rapport with other people in the room.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of fun to see. And honestly, the whole thing with doing the live show was that, we needed to put our own spin on it because we knew that there were all these other podcasts coming. But Mission Log, the regular recorded Mission Log, takes a long time to create. It's at bare minimum just the research of watching an episode of Star Trek a few times over and taking notes and writing a recap and formatting those notes into a conversation that we can have. It's a challenging show to produce. Some episodes go together way easier than others, but some take a long time. And we knew we couldn't do that with something that would be timely to the release of Discovery every week. We knew that with Discovery coming on Sunday nights, and we wanted to be live within about 48 hours of that show coming out to make it fresh, we really needed to rely on our listeners to be the ones to help steer the conversation.
I mean, the other problem, I'm sorry, I know you keep wanting to, the other problem with Discovery is it's basically one long story over 15 weeks, whereas we could take like an episode of TOS and we can do beginning, middle, and end of the episode of TOS. With Discovery, I mean, so it's 15 episodes. So the first 5 episodes basically are act 1 of a 3-act, maybe, except that's not even the way it broke down. I think there were only 2 episodes of Discovery that we thought could actually be pulled out and be treated as their own standalone episode. So we've got a lot of thinking to do over the next 10 to 12 years to figure out how we're actually going to do Discovery once we swing back around and hit it for Mission Log.
Yeah.
So a couple things here that you've both sort of glanced over, and I've heard you talk about it on the show, and that is that you don't just watch the episode once, you watch it multiple times, or I think, John, you just said several. So how many is several? 3, 4?
You know, if it's an episode that's relatively easy to wrap your head around, then yeah, you could do it in 3. Watch it once just sort of to have the experience of watching the episode, and then at least another time just to kind of get the general notes down. Here's how I felt about this moment. Here's how I felt about this moment. Here are the ideas that I see being generated by the episode. Then if it's, because Ken and I alternate on who writes the recap, the plot synopsis each week, then I've got to go through methodically start and stop to actually write that recap. And Ken presumably does the same thing. You got to go through and mark for time pretty much. So that's the bare minimum is 3. Sometimes by the time you're done with it, 4 or 5 times within a week before we sit down to record.
Mine's between 2 and 4. It depends on the episode. It depends on the week. It depends on what else I have going on.
Or if you really, really like it. So,
Or if I really, really hate it. Actually, the ones I hate, I actually probably end up watching more, because so often I'll get to Act 3 and be like, wait, what happened?
Right.
So the other thing, Ken, that you've said that was obvious, and it just never occurred to me. It's kind of embarrassing to admit that you would watch it occasionally with closed captioning on, to get certain names and certain things, or maybe a line of dialogue that you missed. And because I don't need closed captioning, I never use closed captioning. And since you gave me that little tip, it's like, oh yeah, I've appreciated certain scenes more because I hear, or I can see more, that maybe the dialogue isn't completely crystal clear for me. So that was an interesting little tip that if you've missed, folks,
John Champion, everybody. That was John's thing.
Really?
I mean, I want to say that maybe I would do it occasionally if there was a spelling that I wanted to know, but I really actually don't care about the spelling. I'll do it phonetically because I'm the only one who's going to be reading it. So yeah, John actually does that a lot more than I do.
Yeah, always. I take at least one pass with the closed captioning on. And in fact, there are other shows that I do. Like I've been doing a pretty regular guest spot on a show that's been going through all the James Bond movies. I watch all of those with closed captioning as well. Because sometimes there's just little moments, a little reference or something that sitting in a theater watching a movie for the first time, you don't pick up on. And I want to make sure that I have all the details right.
The other thing I would be remiss if I didn't bring up is Mr. Champion's trivia. You are a trivia monster. I don't know how you do this or what your resources are, or whether you're just pulling it out of your head, because I've heard you make sort of on-the-fly references, and it's like, holy cow, where, I know you're obviously into this because that's what you do, but where does it all come from?
It's not that hard. I'll dispel a little bit of it here just to say that, look, we all have access to the same things. We've all got Wikipedia. We've all got IMDb. But the thing is, I really want to make sure that if I start there, because you get the director, the writer, the cast, like these are the key things. But then I compare that to some really excellent books. So when we were doing Next Gen, our friend Larry Nemechek had written the Star Trek The Next Generation Companion. So that book was already a great resource to go to just to corroborate what shows up. I had the real privilege of working on the Blu-ray sets for Next Generation and Enterprise. So a lot of that stuff I was around. We have great resources here at Roddenberry where there are documents, and there's just a wall-sized bookcase with all kinds of stuff that I can pull. Not necessarily because I need to hunt down a piece of information, but just to get a little more detail on a piece of information. One of my favorite recent ones was the model in Commander Sisko's office on DS9 of the Horizon. I love that ship. Ken hates that ship, but I think it's so cool. And the more you dig in on that one thing, that there is a reference on the original series, they kind of codified it when you fast forward to Enterprise, that this was the ship that came to Sigma Iosha in a piece of the action, and that book that they dropped off that turned that whole world into a world of 1920s gangsters was something you see on screen in Enterprise. And then just going a step further and reading who built that model that's in Cisco's office and why they built it. I love just sort of following the thread of, you peel back the layer on one thing, it's the model of that ship. Okay, where else did it appear? Who built it? Why did they build it? Why did it end up there? It's easy to kind of go down a rabbit hole when it comes to that.
Mission Log, the recorded version, well, really both, but I'm focusing on the recorded version for this one, is the only word that comes to mind for me is intellectual. Because it's, I mean, sure, there's some joking around and there's some good-natured, banter between the two of you, but you both dig into some really deep topics and deep aspects of the story, and the story that underlies the story, if you will, or at least the message, moral, or meaning. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Of the story. And at first, I wasn't sure how I was going to react to it, because I had watched Star Trek as a very, very young person, and it was more the entertainment, and I really had never looked at some of the things the way you look at them. And so you've caused me to go back and watch so many episodes with a completely different eye and a completely different takeaway from it. And that's one of the reasons that I think that you two are at the pinnacle of the Star Trek podcast world, because you bring that different dimension, that extra dimension to it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say about that. I mean, here's the thing. So Rod comes to Macworld and starts basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Dancing around the possibility of doing a Star Trek podcast. He wants to know about doing podcasts in general. And so we're talking, and it's fairly obvious to me that we're talking about me possibly doing a podcast that he's interested in producing. But we're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, I said, all right, can we stop with all okay, so theoretically, blah, blah, blah. I'm interested in doing this. Let's pretend we've decided I'm going to do it, and let's go ahead and really have the conversation. Basically, what he was doing was offering to let me do what I had done when I watched Star Trek The Next Generation, which was sit around with somebody who is also into Star Trek and talk about all the philosophical whatever about Star Trek. It's just something that, it's something that, to me, Star Trek does. It's interesting to me when it's not something that Star Trek does for people, but then there are plenty of other shows where people get like some huge, intense, like deep meaning that completely just like over me. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's just if this was the particular thing or if it was the particular time that it hit me. Like, I didn't watch Star Trek as a very, very young child. Star Trek, for me, started, I knew who Kirk was. I knew who Spock was. I saw Wrath of Khan when it came out in the theater. But for me, Star Trek really started when Next Gen came out, and I was 17 years old. And I was pretty heavily involved in my church, but I wasn't 100% certain why I was very heavily involved in my church. So I was thinking every Sunday morning, so why am I doing this exactly? And, I was reading novels that my teachers were assigning, and they were saying, look for deeper meaning, right? So maybe it just hit like right at the right moment for me, that when Star Trek came on, I was, accidentally or not, watching TV critically, not like a critic, but with sort of a critical thinking eye. And so I'm sort of the opposite of that. Star Trek, when I see an episode of Star Trek that doesn't do that, I'm kind of mad. They wasted an hour of Star Trek, and at the time there were only 700 something of them when we started this show. Now, who knows? They waste half of them if you want to, because apparently there's going to be a whole week of Star Trek every week eventually. I don't know.
It's funny, when Rod had the idea, and then when he connected me and Ken, and we started to kick around what this show would be, I asked friends of mine who were Star Trek fans, who may or may not have listened to podcasts, but who I definitely knew were active in the fan community, whether it meant chiming on bulletin boards online or going to conventions or whatever. And I said, hey, we're thinking about doing a show kind of along these lines. And they were all sort of like, yeah, I don't know if I'd listen to that show. And we all sort of wrapped our heads around, well, what would make our show ours? Well, what would make it worthy of being called a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast? And I think we all knew from the beginning that it had to be entertaining. And part of the decision to have me and Ken together is that we've had a good give and take. We have not the same, but similar senses of humor. And we know that we want to put some humor into the show each week. We have similar, but not the same points of view when it comes to talking about the big issues. But we knew that there would be a balance there. We knew that we wanted to talk about the heavy issues, but we wanted to make it accessible and fun. And really, it wasn't up to us to dig out the deep issues. Star Trek was already doing that. Star Trek was already grappling with these big issues. And like you said, Ken, not every episode, but enough of them were trying to grapple with the big ideas that all we had to do was pay attention and just sort of ask each other, well, what are they trying to talk about? And are they successful in the way they are trying to talk about it?
And that too is, yes, that was the way that I had watched Star Trek before, but that was also what Rod set us up to do. So even if we had never done that before, it would be what we're doing now, because all these people were coming up to Rod at all these conventions and all these places saying, this changed my life. And so he made the documentary wanting to know more about his father. And he talked to he talked to big celebrities. I mean, he talked to George Lucas. He talked to J.J. Abrams. He talked to different people who had been associated with the shows as well, not just from the movie side. But he wanted us to actually, okay, they didn't all come there because Gene Roddenberry. They all came there because Captain Kirk. They all came there because Commander Sisko, because Captain Picard. And so he didn't just want to, like it or hate it, 1 star, 5 stars, thumbs up, thumbs down. He wanted us to, delve in. So even if it wasn't something that we were inclined to do before, that's the gig and the Bucks don't suck, Chuck. The Bucks, by the way, aren't amazing.
You're now on record.
I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, I was just looking for a way out of that long thing.
Well, let's talk about one other thing that you both really kind of turned my head on. Talk a little bit about Sansar and what that is, and then I want to share my experience and get your reaction to it.
So somehow, somewhere last August, Rod, I think he may know somebody who either works for or works with Sansar. I'm not sure. But it was one of the times that I happened to be in Los Angeles. I was actually crashing at his place for about a week. And he said, hey, come to my office because there's this thing that these people are doing. And they are Linden Labs, who are the people behind Second Life back in the day. Although I shouldn't say back in the day because Second Life actually still has a thriving economy that's going on. People aren't writing about it in the same way they used to, but Second Life is still there and it's still doing what it did. And I would have thought actually that they would find a way to, make Second Life a VR thing, but that is not the way they went. They built this new platform that is called Sansar, and it's similar to Second Life in that it is a place where you can go and you can buy land and you can build a place. And there's a lot of that. There are people who built, clubs and restaurants and, places to play games and whatever. But they were also interested in working with Rod about just on something. They weren't 100% certain what that thing would be. And the idea of, are we talking about the thing? It just occurred to me, John. Are we talking about the thing?
Let's talk about the thing.
So this idea came about where they would actually do a Roddenberry space. We have a name for it. I don't think we've 100% named it yet, so we won't say the name yet. But basically, it's kind of a museum of different things tied, some to the Roddenberry family, some to that's Gene and Majel, not the current generation of the Roddenberry family, the historical Roddenberry family. Some of it's tied to different iterations of Star Trek, and it's going to be this space where people can go and chill and hang out. Now, on the way to that, Rod actually knew somebody who had an Enterprise bridge that they had built, and so we had that moved over to the Sansar space, and we've been holding a couple of events there. We had just a hey, how's it going? We had a trivia night. There is more stuff on the way, although a lot of that's actually probably going to be in the Roddenberry space, which will be opening ridiculously soon. In fact, Chuck, you will be probably among the first group of people that gets to try it, because Sansar is going to be in Vegas at STLV. So that's sort of where that's why I asked, are we talking about this or not? Because that's where the big reveal is going to be.
Well, my experience, when you all announced that you were doing I forget just how you phrased it, Ken, but sort of the meet and greet, the first one, I say, okay, because I've read Snow Crash, I've read plenty of novels about virtual reality. I don't have goggles, and of course the Mac right now is notoriously not powerful enough from a graphics side to do the VR headsets. Okay, fine. So I thought, well, all right, only because it's you two, I want to go and see what you're into and see what the bridge looks like and all that. So I fired up. I don't have a PC in the house. There's a big surprise for everyone. They're all Macs. So I fired up Boot Camp and installed a copy of Windows, and happily everything worked. And I think it only works for some MacBook Pros, because David Ginsburg was trying to do the same thing that the night I was doing it, and he didn't have success. But I ended up on the bridge in Sansar, but not with goggles or anything, just on the screen. And so, John, you have no idea, but I was the guy that, like you said, was very still, that you walk right up to, and I didn't move because I'm still working, trying to figure out the controls.
Sure, right.
But it really changed my view of VR, because there were people that were moving around the bridge. And when one person was over, let's say, in one corner of the bridge, and they would start to talk, all the avatars, except mine, because I'm still working on it, would turn and look at them. Mm-hmm. So I can only imagine with an actual headset, it's going to be that sense of presence is going to be so much more. And maybe this won't surprise anybody, that VR is, because that's kind of what VR is supposed to be. But it was the first time in anything. It was not like a conference call where you have, 3 or 4 talking heads up, or like this call where you two are side by side. I don't know how I guess I look the same to you. Different side by side. It was just a whole other experience. And I came away like really impressed, and have seriously been thinking about getting, a small PC and a set of goggles just to experience more of this. I was out of town when you did the trivia night, so I haven't been back, but it very much left a big impression on me. Am I alone, or was that your experience when you started dabbling with this?
This is one of those experiences where anything that I had read or heard from friends about what VR is like absolutely paled in comparison to trying it for the first time. So when Rod set up a PC at the office and said, okay, well, here's an Oculus thing, and we just need to get this set up and calibrated so we can use it to even try this Sansar experience. Well, the first thing you do in Oculus is do like an orientation, and it's a guided thing with a little robot, kind of looks like Wall-E, inside a trailer, and you start to learn how to use the buttons on the hand grips and look around. It was absolutely mind-blowing. And I can sit here and say it's mind-blowing. I can sit here and say you really have to try it. And it absolutely does not prepare you for the experience at all. It's disorienting in a good way getting into it. It's completely and utterly immersive when you're in it. And then it's disorienting again when you come out of it, because you just feel like you are in that actual place. It's really strange. It's a really odd experience. And there are some drawbacks. There's still just kind of some mechanical things that I'm trying to learn to be better at in VR, like using the hand controls to move around. Doing the hangout and doing the trivia night that we did, there's still a little bit of a thing. Like I grew up doing theater, so I'm okay in front of an audience. It's a little disorienting when you're in a room full of avatars, but you can't read facial expression. And you don't always, you feel like you're having a conversation with someone. You're in a virtual room. You see that there are bodies in that room. You see them moving or talking to you, but it's still a layer removed from being right in front of that person in real life. So I think that'll go away for me more over time as I use it, and I get used to kind of how to act in that world. But it's stunning. I still really don't quite have the words for it. And just from a production point of view with us, working with the people at Sansar has been great. They've been really enthusiastic, incredibly helpful at getting all of this up and running. And every time I step in, whether it's our bridge or just for fun, getting a sense of the equipment, Ken and I would just say, I remember one time, like, oh, here, go meet me in this museum, or go meet me in this drive-in theater that looks like you're in the desert, or go meet me in the Apollo Moonshot Museum. Oh, look, you can end up on the moon if you step on this transporter pad in the museum. It's bizarre and so much fun.
What's going to be really neat, too, because, I mean, now it's going to sound like I'm poo-pooing the whole thing, and I don't want to. That introductory thing that John was talking about was mind-blowing. Facebook, I have no idea, or Oculus, division of Facebook, I have no idea how much money they spent on that, but every penny of it was worth it, because it made me want to go out and find so many other things. And then you hit some things that are kind of lackluster. Honestly. Now, Disney has more money than Facebook, probably. I don't know. Facebook's pretty big.Maybe they don't actually, now that I think about it. Facebook's one of the top 5. Oh, it's the macOS Ken part of my brain kicking off again. Disney did a virtual reality space for the movie Coco. And I think it still exists. And that right now is my favorite thing that I've seen in virtual reality. It's mind-blowing. I mean, and I know we keep using that phrase, but it is, there are not words for how cool that is, especially because I felt like I was there, even though it's animated like Pixar. So you've got like so many levels of things that are messing with your head. It is animated like Pixar, but you are in that space and you feel like you are there. Then what's weird is when you're wearing the headset, you still are inclined to like try to do things with your hand, like, you know, touch the top of your head or scratch your eyes or something like that. It was just in moving around naturally in the Disney thing that they had put together that I found a bunch of actions that it wouldn't have even occurred to me that there would be. So the people who have more money than Croesus can really do amazing things in VR. What the Sansar people are doing in VR is also really interesting, and that Sansar has already gotten better since the first time I was there, I think, which is not to say that it was bad, but they're refining, they're getting better. The cool thing they're doing is the Second Life thing, which was trivia night, and at the other meetup, there was a young woman from Germany hanging out with us. And she was in Germany. She wasn't from Germany, she was in Germany. That's where she was, except she was also in Sansar with us. The longer it's out there, the more people learn about it, the more people are turning up to the different events, and the more people are turning up to different things. My first time in Sansar by myself, I was literally by myself. And it kind of made me sad because I was going to all these different places and I thought, wouldn't it be neat to actually bump into somebody? And the only person I bumped into, I think, was probably on a PC because we didn't have the ability to talk. I know that's something that's going to get ironed out at some point. And so, I mean, to me, that's still the real promise. As much fun as it is to go and play in the Coco world by yourself, at the end of it, you're still playing by yourself, and you take off your helmet and you can't even say anything to anybody except, wow, it's mind-blowing, you should try it. But then it's going to be them doing it by themselves too. So, I mean, the really neat thing about Sansar has been I mean, yes, I can go outside and meet people, I guess, but the really cool thing has been like meeting people and hanging out in that space, because not unlike STLB, not unlike all the different Mac podcasts we listen to, it's a community built around these people who are interested in this thing. And, they come to it with whatever they come with, but then you meet there and you've got this other thing. You've got this other community that starts to grow. Plus really cool because, you can fly around and stuff.
It's also a really friendly community. I mean, the only thing that I can compare this to is that when I first got online, early 90s, when I had my first, say, like AOL account or something, and there's that immediate wow factor of like, wait, I can email a friend that I have in England, or I can be in a chat room and there's somebody from this country, and that's all really cool, but you still have that layer of anonymity. It's just text on a screen. It's sort of, in my mind, it was sort of very ephemeral. But there's something very different, even if you're looking at an avatar. There's something, first of all, way impressive that you are talking to people from all over the world in every time zone, and it simply doesn't matter. But the way the VR works, tricking your brain into thinking that you are physically in the same space, that you're having a conversation with an actual person. The avatar mouth is moving when they're talking. Like you said, Chuck, they turn to the person who's talking, so you see the other bodies in the room look and at least give the impression that they're engaged in what's happening. It's a very different thing than just a few keyboard strokes.
There is also the immersion part of it. There is a rail that goes around the bridge of the Enterprise when you watch it on TV, and that rail obviously is in the replica that Rod's friend had built as well. And both John and I have gone to lean on that rail. And it's not there, except I'm on the bridge of the Enterprise, so I ought to be able to lean on that rail. I mean, it doesn't look exactly like reality, but it's close enough to reality that your brain's like, I'm gonna lean on that. No, you're not. No, you're gonna go down. Stop.
The first time I did it, I knocked something off the shelf behind me because I just happened to be moving around in the room, and that happened to be in the real world near where I was in the virtual world where that rail is, and I'm pretty sure I had knocked over that ship, but it was that convincing.
Well, see, I can tell you that doing it on a screen, I didn't have that problem, but somehow I ended up standing up on that rail. My avatar standing up on there, and I'm waiting for somebody to. It was I'm waiting for somebody to kick me out of here because I'm hitting every control I can think of. Get down off the rail. Get down off the rail. So now I'm anxious to try it with the goggles, but just the fact that it affected me so deeply on a flat screen just makes me very anxious to try it with goggles, because I think I can appreciate where this could go a lot more than I ever have been able to before. And it's because of you two and this particular experience. Because there was nothing else I have come across that intrigued me enough to want to go try it. I've had Oculus headgear on at NEB a couple years, and one time I'm standing in a herd of thundering elephants, and another time I'm in a helicopter, and that was cool. But it's more okay. I can look around, or I can look up, I can see the blades spinning, but you weren't doing anything. And sort of to your point, here I was able, in even a very limited fashion, to interact with some other people, and that made all the difference.
There's another thing.
Go ahead.
Forget me. There's another thing too that the Sansar people have done a good job of reaching out to some folks. Like there's we're building a museum. Well, we're never going to build a museum in real life, but we can build one there that sort of feels like it. There's a great place that they have that's sort of like an explorers club in Sansar, and there are 3 doors that you can go through, and those 3 doors actually go to 3 different Egyptian ruins, and they're actually really Egyptian ruins that somebody has gone and they photographed. They've gotten the permission. I want to say they're UNESCO sites. They've gotten the permission to go in there and take enough photography of them that they can recreate them in 3D. And no, I don't feel like I've actually been there, but I can get this close to the glyphs on the wall, which I would never be able to do if I were actually there. If I were actually there, I'd be outside that door and just kind of maybe able to peek in a tiny bit, because they're never going to let somebody like me in there. But this actually does allow that. And they've also got a fantastic museum. I think it's the Hollywood Museum has put up a retrospective of Star Wars stuff, and some of it is toys that you might have owned. Some of it is toys that never came out. Some of it is actually handwritten notes by George Lucas, and you can get that close to the handwritten notes by George Lucas and see, his scribbling and his ideas, changing. And if I lived in LA, I might have been able to see that stuff. If I lived in New York and it happened to be touring around, I might have been able to see that stuff. Chances are, any place I live that's not going to be the kind of thing that I'm going to be able to access at any given time in any kind of real way. I might be able to go online and read a page, but I'm not going to be able to, flip it over and see what's on the other side, which, depending on how the particular object in virtual reality is built, you can actually do that too. And until you get to really try it, yes, we've all, as you said, we've read Snow Crash, and this isn't Snow Crash. We're not to that level yet. But we've all read about how, these are all things that you will be able to do. It's really neat to see that it's actually starting to happen finally.
Yeah.
There's a component to it that is there's the access to material, which is great. That, as Ken is saying, you can walk up to something and virtually touch it and move it around and get a sense of that object, or just being in a room, like I said, with other people and sort of facing them with your avatar and having them face you and have a conversation. And it feels like they're right there, even if they're halfway around the world. There's another component to it that is sort of an emotional kind of storytelling component that I think is really intriguing. That, again, it's something that was described to me that I didn't really get until I tried it, which is, if you think about it, when you go to a movie or you're watching a TV show that you're really engrossed in, you know that they're actors on a screen. You know they did take after take. You know that they're not there in the room with you, but you can still be emotionally affected by the thing that you're watching. And in the virtual space, I think the initial emotion is that you're sort of in awe that you get to be someplace you would not otherwise be. I still love the moonscape that they built for the Apollo landing, because you can, quote unquote, beam over and just find yourself standing on the moon looking at the lunar module. And to me, this was just, as a kid, this was always something that was amazing to me, and hopefully never ceases to be amazing to me. But to walk around it in a virtual space in the context of what it looks like on the moon, not, you got the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago where it's a replica and you're 5 feet away from it because there's a railing there and there's 100 other people around you. It's just a very different thing. And as that storytelling in VR gets better and better, I see this as being a whole avenue for entertainment, but it's an interactive entertainment that we're simply not used to. There are some people who are building an experience / game / museum based around the Titanic. I'm an ocean liner fanatic. That's not my favorite ship, but there's something...
He likes ships that didn't crash.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But there's something that, without trying to sound too grim here, there's something really amazing about standing in a room where you don't hear a soundtrack playing, there aren't actors running around. It's not watching a movie. It's just being in an environment where something is happening. It's creepy. It's really, really weird. But there's something about that heightened level of realism that is unlike, picking up a book and reading about it, or watching a movie, or just talking to somebody, but to feel yourself actually in a space where a historic event took place is mind-boggling.
There's one other thing really quickly. It does sort of, we keep going back to the moon thing, and it really is impressive to walk on the moon, to walk on that landing space. But the museum that's tied to that has this one thing that's easy to ignore, but also, I think, pretty incredible. It's got the Earth, and then way down over there, there's the moon. on this huge long room. And there's a line that goes around the Earth like 3 or 4 times, and then it takes off towards the moon. And what that is, hanging in the middle of nowhere, or hanging in the middle of nothing rather, is the path that the lunar module took on the way to get there. And so that's really neat. But then if you get close to that line, you can hear the radio communications from the astronauts back to Houston at that point in their flight. So, I mean, it's not about the only thing I think to liken it to is like there are filmmakers who will set up a camera, they will put actors in front of the camera, and then they will let the actors do the thing in front of the camera, and then they strike the set and they move on. There are other filmmakers that use the camera as a tool in a way. Martin Scorsese moves the camera, not like a crazy person. Woody Allen did it in like the 90s, and it was kind of sickening and horrible because it was all hand cam stuff. But he took the camera off the tripod and he moved around. One of the really cool things about virtual reality is being able to recreate any space that you already know in exacting detail. The other thing that's cool about it is to take the virtual part of virtual reality and say, okay, see how real this looks? Now, stick your head right here, and you're going to get a whole different experience based on nothing than somebody said, oh, right, these aren't actually walls. I can float something in the middle of the room if I want to. And it becomes a whole new type of experience. It's kind of cool, Chuck.
It is. And I know there are going to be folks that are listening to this, and if they're still listening to us, they're going to say, these three are nuts.
Yeah.
And we're not.
Yes.
Regardless.
Yeah, regardless. It's a unique experience. And now all of a sudden I have a passion for it that I think I had at one point when we were all talking about it, and it was the gloves and the goggles and everything had first come out, and then it sort of faded away, and you thought, okay, well, we're never going to get there. Now all of a sudden we're right on the cusp of it, and this gives you just even with a flat screen, again, you can get a little bit of a sense of it. And I'm dying now to get to STLV and try the goggles and the actual full experience. I'm afraid what it's going to cost me when I get home, because I'm going to want to bring that experience back. But that's another discussion. So we've danced around STLV a little bit. Let's just I want you guys to plug what you're doing there and why people should come and see you.
I got no idea.
Yeah, I don't know.
No idea.
Come see us on the first day because we're fresh that day.
Yeah, it's all downhill after that.
It is pretty much, yeah. If you want a scintillating conversation, show up on Wednesday. If you want a couple of guys going, yeah. Saturday might be
Sunday.
Yeah.
So STLV, hashtag STLV is Star Trek Las Vegas. That is the big annual Star Trek convention that they've been doing at the Rio for the last 6 or 7 years. Prior to that, it was the Hilton. And it, other than I think FedCon in Germany and a couple other places, at least this is the biggest American Star Trek convention. And it's this is my 12th year going this year.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy. And all the cliches about why people go to Star Trek conventions, for better or for worse, they're all true and they're all wonderful. You go because you get to hang out with your friends and in a very positive environment, be excited about something that you enjoy. I was half kidding when I said years ago at one of those conventions, it happened to fall at the same time that Comedy Central was doing the roast of William Shatner. And I remember watching that in Quark's Bar, and it was the Super Bowl for nerds in all the best senses of that description. It was just great. And I look forward every year to going back and doing what we do, which is to talk about our show and people who come up to the table who are new to Mission Log or maybe new to podcasts entirely. That's one kind of conversation. And then there's the people who come back year after year who listen regularly, weekly, and want to challenge us on something that we've said or add to the conversation in some way. And that's great too. And the other part of it is that it's just simply a party. We work during the day and it's hard work and it's long hours, but then we get to go sit at the bar and talk to people and just kind of chill out for a bit. It's a blast. It's like VR, like Sansar. It's a little hard to explain to people who have never been to one. But, unlike Comic-Con, which we'll be at this coming weekend, where you've got 130, 150,000 people all crowding in, vying for space and a whole downtown section. This is all everybody fit neatly into one hotel, and it's a large space, but you can make your way in and out of there relatively easily. There's nothing like it. I would hate to miss it. I have big FOMO on that.
It's a bit like what I was saying earlier about the live shows, how there's this one show going on and how there's this, thing going on in the chat room. I had a sort of a weird just realization recently. Like, there are people that it wouldn't be Star Trek Las Vegas without them if they didn't show up. And we're like this core, group of people, and it's hard to imagine the thing even happening if any one of us wasn't there. And there are probably 10 other groups or 15 or 20 or 50 other groups who feel exactly the same way that we've never met. There's always somebody new, which is interesting. I think part of it is it's a bit like Macworld in a way, right? I mean, if you were at Macworld, you might not know anything else about the person that was there, but you've got this one thing because here you both are. And Star Trek Las Vegas is kind of the same thing. I mean, I think because it's in Las Vegas, right? If you're at a Star Trek convention in Albany, chances are they're from in or around Albany. If you're at one that's in Birmingham, Alabama, chances are they're from or around Birmingham, Alabama. If you're one in Vegas, I think I know a couple of people, 3, I believe, who actually are from Vegas, who come to that convention every year. But almost everybody else is coming in from someplace else. You've made an effort at that point to come be, among your kind in a way, somebody who you're not going to have to explain your Star Trek tattoo. You're not going to have to, explain what you're doing when you're doing that and why it's important to you to do it. It's not important to me to do it, but I know a lot of people that's like a huge thing for them, and they don't have to explain it. They're there and they're doing that, and that's great. It's really something. And I think John also mentioned the drinks.
Yeah, we might have 1 or 2 cocktails.
1 or 2.
Yeah.
Well, you two are the reason I finally came to STLV to see you, and sort of that way I knew at least 2 people. And my first thing, I came away just blown away by, first of all, the openness of the community, but the passion of the audience, the passion of the people on stage, the actors. Everyone has a passion for this, and that doesn't mean a deadly serious passion. Sure, there obviously is a lot of laughter and a lot of foolishness, but just the dedication to the craft, whether that craft is the music of Star Trek, the acting, the writing, the props, the makeup. I mean, that sort of sums up for me is the passion. And I admit I'm a sucker for passion because it just pulls me right in and energizes me. And I really, really like, no pun intended. But now I'm a regular. I want to come back because I want to see my friends and I want to experience that whole feeling again.
I'll give you a little teaser for what Ken and I are doing this weekend at Comic-Con. We'll be part of the Roddenberry Presents panel, but it's just a couple of minutes to kind of catch people up on here's what we're working on, here's what's coming. The next day, we're part of a panel that our friend Larry Nemechek put together that is about kind of the, shall I say schism? Ken?
Schism!
It's about a schism in Star Trek fandom. And if all you do is go online and read comments from people about Star Trek, whatever their fandom is, TOS original fans, or they're people who grew up with the syndicated shows, or they're people who started with Next Gen, or they're people who are starting now relatively recently with the J.J. Abrams movies or Discovery or what have you. If all you ever read was what's online, you would think that Star Trek is nothing but hateful, gatekeeping, narrow-minded fans, But you go to something like Star Trek Las Vegas, and Chuck, you mentioned the passion, and that's what always impresses me, is that it doesn't matter who's on stage. There's an audience for it. And they're there to take in everything they can get out of that stage panel and to bond with their fellow fans who are there about that. One of my first years, it must have been my first year. It was 2006. It was the 40th anniversary of TOS, the original series. And it was a year after Enterprise had gone off the air. And Enterprise, up until that point, and if that's all you read, it was the least popular of all the series, and fans hated it, and they just spent all their time online bashing that show, and that's why it quote unquote failed by only running 4 seasons instead of 7, right? But I like that show. There's a lot about Enterprise that I like, warts and all. I got to Vegas though, and it was the 40th anniversary of TOS, and everybody's excited to see Shatner and Nimoy and George Takei and everybody from the original. But I'm here to tell you that the biggest audience that entire weekend was for Scott Bakula. And the love that was being shown to Enterprise and how enthusiastic fans were about that show, that's what I remember most from that convention, was just it completely blew out of the water everything that I'd sort of built up in my head about how Trek fans were divided about one show versus another. And I hate that it comes down to one show versus another, but in some people's minds it does. I think that's unfortunate. But if you go to a convention, you find that everybody has a seat at the table. Everybody has something to share about what they enjoy. And a friend of mine and Ken's, who's been going year after year, heard us talking about kind of a similar thing a couple of years ago. And he said, you know what, when I come to Vegas next year, this was looking back a year or two ago, my question will be, tell me about your Star Trek. If it's somebody that he meets that let's say, I think this guy, his favorite series is Deep Space Nine, doesn't know anything about Enterprise or Voyager or whatever. He wants to open a conversation by finding out, well, what do you love about the thing that you love? I think that's great. I think people are more inclined to do that in person than they are online. And so I'm glad that an in-person thing like STLV exists.
That's an interesting opening line for just standing in line as you're waiting to get in, or standing in line for anything, or you sit down to wait for one of the stage presentations. That is a very interesting line.
Yeah. Well, and you see people in costumes, and maybe something that I don't recognize, or so I want to know, well, what is it about that character that speaks to you that you want to embody that? You want to put that on, you know?
Yeah.
Why is it because an episode touched you, a character, a story meant something that much to you? And that's really what you see in a lot of the costumes. Some are just fun, ironic, silly, whatever.
Sure.
Know? But a lot of times it's people who really have an emotional connection to what they're doing.
Well, and sometimes one thing that surprised me is you would see costumes for that. There was you knew the character, but it was a character in one episode, and that was it. You know, just and it wasn't even necessarily a major player, but it's like, yeah, I recognize that. I know which one it is. Why did you decide to dress like that? It's cool that you did, but I don't understand. Yeah. So all kinds of connections.
That always kicks off an interesting conversation. And Ken, I mean, you and I, we talk about the deep cuts every now and then. Yeah.
Well, the only time that we've actually done cosplay together, we were characters from, I think, the last episode of season 1 of Next Gen. And I'll tell you the reason that we did it was because, first of all, I found the character hilarious, but the other thing was it was an easy costume to do. I think it cost us maybe $35 each, and we could actually order almost everything off Amazon. Mine actually cost me a bit more because I had to have a guitar.
Oh, right.
But yeah, which actually took a bit of work as well. But I mean, why does that character still? He is one of my favorite characters, and I don't. There's no good reason. There's no good reason for him to be one of my favorite characters. I think it's more honestly the story I made up about him in my head. That's like, I love him because he did that thing that nobody knows about but me.
Yeah. But the fact that I'm going to say what LQ Sonny Clemens.
Oh,
right?
You're so good.
Yep.
Yes.
Give that man a martini for some reason. Because really what you should have is a bourbon, but LQ likes his martinis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Guys, you've been very generous with your time. I'd love to just go on and on and on. There's so many things I'd like to talk to you about, and so maybe we'll do it again. But
well, we've only hit the halfway point in tonight's show. Oh,
yeah,
wait, no?
yeah.
Okay.
But before we wrap up, I want to make sure that folks know where they can both find you, both on and off Mission Log, because I know you both do things other than just Mission Log. So, John, I'll start with you since I introduced Ken first in the beginning. Where else can folks find you outside of the Mission Log projects?
Well, honestly, it's more so Mission Log now. So podcast.roddenberry.com, the Mission Log Live, the Trek Files is the other show that I produce with Larry, and that's all about the deep dive into the individual documents. Now, personally, I also I mentioned the Bond show that I do, 602 Club. That's on Trek FM, Trek.fm. And I usually write about that from my personal Twitter account at DVD Geeks. That was my old show. I don't even know if there are DVDs anymore, but I like the name. So at DVD Geeks on Twitter is probably the other good way to find me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We will do it again, I promise. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in Vegas.
Can't wait, man.
Mr. Ray.
Mr. Joyner.
Now, are you going to get them all, or am I going to have to prompt you? Because I think the last time I had to prompt you.
Well, I'll stick to 3 this time. Of course, Mission Log, which people have heard about, throughout this show. And then I also produce a show for the guys at Secure Mac. It is called The Checklist by Secure Mac. It is it's actually kind of a work in progress right now. We're sort of retooling that show. We do that about once a year, it seems. We get to about this time of year and go, all right, what else can we try? So that's changing a tiny bit right now. But if people want to hear things in the past, securemac.com/checklist is the website for that, or just go wherever you get podcasts. And then, of course, Mac OS Can, which is still a Monday through Friday daily dive into Apple news and news related to Apple news, or things that are kind of funny, tangentially related to Apple news, and you can find that at macoscan.com.
Excellent. And again, Mission Log, Roddenberry Star Trek Podcast, and Mission Log Live, Tuesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, which is 7 p.m. Pacific?
Sure
yes.
is.
I know when it is on the East Coast because that's where I am. But yeah, it's a lot of fun, both in the chat room and the show itself. So check it out. I'll be there.
Good.
If I'm in town, you'll find me logged into that.
Nice.
Guys, thanks again so much. I will see you both in Las Vegas in a real short time.
Can't wait, Chuck. Awesome.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope we opened your eyes maybe a little bit with the virtual reality discussion. I hope we entertained you with some of the other. I really wanted to do this because Mission Log is one of my absolute favorite podcasts. I wait for it to come out every Thursday, and it's the first thing I listen to on Thursday, other than maybe Mac OS Can. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our MacVoices Facebook group and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices magazine, free on Flipboard. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us at patreon.com/MacVoices and join these folks who help keep MacVoices coming to you. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.